A couple of weeks ago, I posted a caption, "Why I No Longer Believe." Now, that post was obviously talking about no longer believing in evolution. Not that I ever did, by the way, but that heading was an enticement to get people to watch, and thanks for those who did. I was either too smart or too simple to believe that we ever came from apes. Yet some who just read the heading thought that I was talking about no longer believing, relating it to their Christian faith. How sad to jump to that conclusion. Others at least gave me the courtesy to listen through, and I thank you. And I hope that you'll listen through there today, so please stay with me. While obviously there are always skeptics out there, it's very easy to dismiss the content of a post with comments like, "He should go back to school," or "How unscientific." Well, the reason for this post, just last night I was watching Ps Morgan. Ps Morgan was podcasting on YouTube, interviewing one of the top scientific minds in the world today, Stephen Meyer. This credible, highly credentialed scientist said pretty much exactly word for what I said on my last post.
Is your belief that the Darwin theory actually fails?
I think it does fail. The idea of natural selection acting on random mutations and variations is now understood to lack the creative power to generate major changes in the history of life. Bill Gates said that DNA is like a software program, but much more complex than any we've ever devised.
Big Bang Theory. Why would that lend support to a theory of a God?
The picture of the universe that has emerged is a universe that had a definite beginning and therefore requires some sort of external creator or cause.
That comes back to the idea of a designer of all.
Now, they were discussing how unscientific the theory of evolution is. You can find that, as I mentioned, on YouTube. See, Stephen Meyer is not the only scientist, by the way. I've seen a long list, hundreds of names, who believe in God, scientists who believe in God. Here's a photo of many of them. Now, the majority of scientists now believe also that life is just far too complex to just have arrived, and so they down the theory of intelligent design. It's accepted in many scientific circles. Some don't want to call him God because that would just be a step too far for some, yet many do, like Meyer and the long list I just showed you. I mentioned in my post, and it's true, Darwin in the 18th century had no knowledge of the complexity of DNA, of a cell or an atom. He never had a clue about the amazing workings of a cell, which they once thought was just a simple cell. Even I, in the 50s and 60s, was taught wrongly in school about the amoeba, the simple cell they thought was simple, they believed all living life came from. Yet we know today the cell is like a micro-manufacturing universe in its own right. Do a study and find out what is inside a cell. It may just surprise you. I have, and I've lectured on it. You will never call it a simple cell again. Remember that you have between 75 and 100 million cells in your body, and in every cell. And besides the flagella that I mentioned in my post, how incredible it is, and it could not have evolved, just that one little part, but I've mentioned that defies evolution. There is your DNA in a cell, only 4 letters, CTGA, only 4 nucleotides and nucleides, and forgive me for my pronunciation. I've mentioned before that I had a speech impediment and still do. But if you unravel the DNA in one cell, it makes a 6-foot strand. Now, there are 3 billion characters of CTGA in one single cell. Listen now. There are 500,000 characters in an average book, and that is counting the space between the letters as well. In other words, just in one cell, there are enough characters to fill 6,349 books. Go figure. Or I could say, as my mother would say, put that in your pipe and smoke it. You know, there's no other code like it. Even Bill Gates says that. If all your DNA was unraveled, you would have enough to go to the moon and back 178,000 times. Ps Morgan, who also is apparently a believer in God, interviewing the scientist Stephen Meyer, were discussing how absurd and outdated it is now for the evolutionists to believe that something came out of nothing. Exactly what I was saying. Even Richard Dawkins, one of the world's leading atheists, is on record saying he has no explanation how life came out of dead matter. Yet one of the comments on my post called me unscientific. Really? You know, Sir Isaac Newton, one of the greatest scientists of all time, he wrote more about God than science. Other incredible scientists who believed in God, Lord Kelvin, Pascal, Louis Astral, Francis Bacon, Sir Karl Popper. Sir Karl Popper fills half a column in the International Who's Who with his scientific achievements. He said this: evolution is not a scientific fact, but a metaphysical philosophy. I think I'm in good company. You know, the fine-tuning of the universe and our own galaxy solar system for life to exist in itself is mind-boggling. For it all to come together on this one planet, the exact distance from the Earth to the Sun, 93 million miles. If it were just 83 million miles, 10 million miles closer, which is just a few cosmic yards in the scheme of things, in one direction, we'd all fry. Or if it was 10 million miles in the other direction, we'd all freeze. We're also the exact right distance from the moon for the tides of our oceans, the right elements in the atmosphere, CO2 and hydrogen and oxygen and so forth. Gravity is just right to drop a feather to the earth, but just enough so that we can run and walk. I could go on, but there are over 200 what they call fine-tuning forks, the exact right tilt of the earth. You may not know it, but the earth is moving at 67,000 miles per hour, and at the same time it is spinning at 1,000 miles per hour. Apart from the miracle that we don't get motion sickness, what is the chance of it all happening by itself? No chance. And by the way, our own galaxy is traveling at 640,000 miles per hour through space. That means 1 second ago, you were 190 miles back there. Talk about putting the past behind you. Why not do some study and research? I have. Do you know that there are some gigantic stars that have been found out there? Now you remember this and think about it. You can fit 1.3 million Earths into our sun. The biggest star, and I can't pronounce it correctly, but Skeety, and you can Google it, is so big that you could fit 5 billion suns inside of it. Cangus Margaris, who they thought once was a star, but it's a constellation, they say now, known as Big Dog, is so big, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, this star would be the height of Mount Everest, 6 miles high. Now, I know all these things are beyond our comprehension. Darwin didn't know that. Huxley didn't know that. And by many of your comments, you did not know it either. Science has moved on, but some people, unfortunately, haven't. The comments like that was mentioned, I was unscientific, that I did not know what I was talking about. People who commented negatively like Billy Owen, Henrik Paulson, Neil Donovan, John Lyers, I'm naming you now, Tom Hutchison, John Cronk, Chris Cooper, and Roger Tucker, all endeavored to call me out in some way or to try to correct me. On one comment, I was talking about protons and electrons in an atom, and the slip of a tongue, once I mentioned proteins instead of protons. Proteins are in cells, I know that, hey, but a slip of the tongue, not as bad as Joe Biden, right? And he's the president of the United States. So he would say, hey, just give me a break, man. I'm smiling. Now, I'm in no way offended or put out by all the comments, but you can call me uneducated if you want, or you can call me just a kid from Taranaki. But for all your comments, you're now going to have to refer them to people like Stephen Meyer, who, as I said, is one of the top scientific minds in the world. And that long list, by the way. Huxley, one of the most known atheists that has ever lived, said, whatever is the point of evolution or wherever it leads to, we will believe it. In other words, evolution is not a theory, but a religion, endeavoring to replace God. By the way, Google this. They say that there are only 4%, some say 7% of the world's population that are atheists. Talk about being in a minority. To be honest, some of the comments, I can tell you that you did not know what you were talking about. Like the comment that one person said that every fossil is proof of evolution. I'm so sorry for your ignorance. The truth is, every fossil that has been found among the millions, there's not one that is showing a species evolving from one into another species. That is why it's called and well known in scientific circles as a missing link. Every scientist knows about it. If you found one, you'd be famous. Anybody with an education knows that there's never been a fossil showing evolution in between the species, like a backbone forming and so forth. So I have to tell you, as evolution is called the chain of life, can I ask you what makes up a chain? Links make up a chain. As there's no in-between fossils found, in other words, no links, there is no chain. There's no chain of life, just life as God created. And by the way, not only is there no fossil record in the change of the millions found, there is no observation of it taking place even today. Can I go on? Science expresses itself in 5 elements: space, time, matter, motion, and power. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In that one verse, that very first verse, you have the 5 scientific elements, all 5. Brett Porter commented on my post for me being a pastor to quit the science. Well, for over 42 years of preaching, I've also taught many times on apologetics, which is a form of evangelizing, debating and reasoning the logical and evidence of God. You can look on my website and check it out, and you'll find the blockbuster series that I've spoken many times on, and how incredible the universe and the amazing human body. You know, the human body is amazing. Let me just continue. For example, the Bible says in Psalm 139, God knit us together in our mother's womb. God knit us together. Knit is a very word to describe DNA. I could give you literally thousands of incredible facts on the human body. You can check out my series on petermortlock.com and talk and have a look and have a learn. Another example, did you know 1 inch long in your mother's womb, 1 inch long, 1 million nerve cells started coming out of your forming eyeball, growing out to meet another million nerve cells coming out from your forming brain, and they all meet up and join together. And not just join together randomly, they all join up with their corresponding numbers. In other words, number 1, number 5 number 1, and number 352, 5 number 352, and so forth. Life is a miracle. You have 75,000 miles of bloodlines in your body. You have 20 square feet of skin, which replaces itself every 2 weeks. Every square inch contains 1,300 nerve endings, 100 sweat glands, 3 million cells, 10 feet of blood vessels. Do you want me to talk about how incredible your heart is, your lung is? I can. No wonder the Bible says you're wonderfully and fearfully made. Your brain, by the way, in which they say there are as many circuits in your brain as there are stars in our galaxies. I mean, billions. I know it's a pity some people did not use it more. I often say, how thick can people be and still breathe? I've talked about how the body is covered in laminin, a cell adhesive. It is like the glue that holds your skin together, trillions all over your entire body. Take a look at this photo of laminin. It's in the form of a cross. You know, Colossians 1 says, all things were made through him and by him, and he holds all things together. But laminin on one end of the spectrum, so small, on the other end of the spectrum, the Hubble telescope some years ago zoomed out into the furthest galaxy that it could reach. That galaxy was called the Whirlpool Galaxy, also known as the darling of the universe. Here's a photo of it. The telescope zoomed right into the center of that Whirlpool Galaxy, and take a look at what they saw. A cross, a gigantic cross, millions of miles wide and high. These are NASA's photographs, not mine. I've studied the universe, the planets, human body, evolution. You can call me a lot of things, but I know there are a lot of smart people out there, smarter than me. But I'd be happy to sit down with any of you and discuss these issues with you. And after dropping out of school earlier than many too, I've learned a few things. Can I just ask people, please don't jump to conclusion or put words in my mouth or say things I did not say. Neil Donovan said that I was explaining a God that created the universe only 6,000 years ago. How silly. I never said that. I said that it was 6,000 years ago that Adam fell. Adam sinned. His fall started the clock for the human race as we know it today. Not 6,000 years when Adam was born, for he lived before the fall. Now, for how long he lived before the fall, we don't really know. I have a theory, but I wasn't there. I did not say the earth was only 6,000 years old. I could talk about the billions of years that could easily be between Genesis 1 verse 1, and the word created there is for the first time, and then it goes on and it talks about being recreated. It's called the gap theory. They don't start on me about that because some people get pretty emphatic and wound up about it, but I was not there, nor were you. The Bible does say that 1,000 years is like a day unto the Lord. Moses, who wrote the book of Genesis and the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, in Psalm 90, the only psalm he wrote, and in Peter in the New Testament says that a day is like 1,000 years unto the Lord. So just as the Son of God, Jesus, was given to us 4,000 years after Adam fell, in other words, perhaps 4 days in God's economy of time, the Son, our Son in the sky in Genesis 1, was also given on the 4th day. So obviously God does not count days as we do by the rising of our sun, for there are 3 before the 4th. Or I could say, if God created a 100-year-old tree at the sound of his voice like that, at the snap of his fingers, and you came around the corner and looked at that tree, it would look like a 100-year-old tree. It would taste like a 100-year-old tree. It would smell like a 100-year-old tree. Yet God had just created just before you came around the corner. How old is the earth? I don't know, and neither do you. God has been around a long time, eternity. He is, he was, and he is to come. As I've shared in my other recent posts, where did God come from? To ask where God came from is like asking, is the bachelor married? Or what is the taste of blue? It's an illogical question, because if you could answer it, you'd be God. It is true, God can't be known, but he can be understood. Sorry, God can be known, but he cannot be understood. I better get it right. We do know and do have a clear historical factual tree back to the Adam's fall, the fall of Adam, not the beginning of Adam. It is in the Bible, approximately 6,024 years ago, which the Bible, by the way, is and is known as the most historical, accurate book ever written. 2024 years since Christ was on the planet. I feel sorry for people who say things like, well, how do you know Jesus existed? That, my friend, to be honest, is a very ignorant and silly question. He's the most documented person in history. 2024, think about it. There are 24,634 early writings of Christ, 5,366 New Testament parchments, the earliest dating back before 100 AD. The Gospels were written in around 40 AD. In comparison, there are only 10 on Julius Caesar and the Gallic Wars, yet they teach that in schools. There's more evidence that Christ rose from the dead than that Cleopatra existed, or even that Napoleon fought in the Battle of Waterloo, yet nobody denies that. The better, bigger, more important, intelligent question should be not did he exist, but who was he? Was he just a crazy man, or was he a liar? Was he just a good man, or was he who he said he was? Obviously, he was not a crazy man. Read the Gospels and the Bible, and obviously not a liar either. In fact, he could not have just been a good man. If so, then that would make him a liar, for he himself said he was the Son of God, the Messiah. Maybe you might say, well, he was a con man. Yet history shows that he did things that con man can't and wouldn't do, like feeding the 5,000, healing the sick, raising the dead. And so, to be honest, that only leaves one explanation. He was who he said he was. He was, and that, my friend, means that you and I are accountable to him. He's the only one that ever came back from the dead. Even Houdini could not find his way back after promising his wife that he would. No other great religious leader of any faith claimed to be God, and none of them came back from the dead. They all died and stayed dead. Many are in the graves today and still with us, occupied. Jesus' tomb is empty. I've been there. I've been to Jerusalem many times. His resurrection is more than documented, with hundreds of people, over 500, witnessing and seeing the resurrected Christ. Amazingly, people get found guilty in court with just 2 witnesses. His resurrection changed the disciples. Those disciples that were a scared bunch of men when Christ was on the cross, hiding behind closed doors. He changed the resurrection. It changed them to men who went boldly into the marketplace, preaching the resurrected Christ and ultimately giving their own lives and martyrdom for their faith. You know, Sir Lionel Lucke, who one of the most decorated lawyers in all time, proved in a court of law the resurrection of Christ. He declared the case for Christ is beyond question. Mark Twain said, it's amazing what people will believe when it's not in the Bible. Even today, science works with limited time, limited facts, limited knowledge. Once they believed that if you traveled faster than 50 miles an hour, you would suffocate to death. One rocket trip to Saturn in 1990 proved 28 known beliefs to be untrue. You know, once scientists thought that the earth was flat. And of course, the Bible says it's circular. God sits on the circle of the earth. It is true that science is catching up with the Bible. So, my friend, read, educate yourself. Yes, read the Bible. And read books like Evidence Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell, and More Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Read The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, and read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I have to say that there have been many atheists like C.S. Lewis and Malcolm Muggeridge, Lee Strobel, who all set out to disprove the Bible, to disprove Christ, and in their quest, they became Christians. I'm amazed when people want to quote the Bible at me. I ask them, have you read it? 99% haven't, but they've heard a verse or two, maybe like a verse, money is the root of all evil. And yet that's a wrong translation. The Bible says the love of money is a root of evil. Or they say, judge not. They don't understand. They haven't read the Bible. We're told to judge what is good and what is evil, and yet we don't condemn people. The odd person trying to debate me may have read the Bible once or parts of it. Well then, when you've read it as many times as I have, from cover to cover, and have studied it, and have studied evolution, the universe, the human body as I have, come and see me and we'll talk. I could say there's nobody intelligent enough to be an atheist. To the person who says you cannot be sure of anything, I ask you, are you absolutely sure about that? Just because you can't see God, that does not mean that he does not exist. You cannot see electricity, but you put your finger in a power socket, you'll feel its existence, all right. You cannot see the wind, but you can feel and see the evidence of that wind. Well, my friend, take a look in the mirror. I mentioned your handprint before. 8 billion people on the earth and not one like you. Take a look up at the heavens and they display the glory of God. And the Bible says, by the way, in the book of Job, that God seals up the hand of every man. Remember, a painting does not exist without an artist, a building without an architect, a watchmaker without a watchmaker. And by the way, our solar system is just one giant clock. So I close. With all the apologetic discussion that I can put forth, it really all comes down to a simple childlike faith that Jesus spoke about. I've met people who are too intelligent for their own good. As the good book says, they in their wisdom became fools. So don't miss heaven by 8 inches from your brain to your heart. In the heart of every person, deep down, I often joke, there are no atheists in an earthquake. When the chips are down, people pray. You might say, I'm not into spiritual things. Too late, my friend. You are a human being with a body, soul, and spirit. Take a look at a dead person next time you see one. What has happened? Something departed. There's a leading French atheist who once boasted that he would destroy Christianity in his lifetime. And on his deathbed, he was held down by 6 strong men, screaming, I'm abandoned by God and by man. In contrast, John Wesley, a man who had served God and had led many to Christ, on his deathbed, he lay quiet and peacefully proclaimed, the best of all, God is with me. Your choice, my friend, heaven or hell. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord through Jesus Christ. He is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords.